At 11:07 a.m. on June 17, 1944, over the chalky farmlands of Normandy, the air shimmered, not with heat, but with the vibration of 100 Merlin engines, a low-frequency hum that rattled the teeth before it reached the ears. Below, wheat fields rippled like disturbed water. Above, the sky was a lattice of contrails and oil smoke, stitched together by bursts of flak that bloomed in silence until the shockwave caught up. In the cockpit of Spitfire, Mission 9, ENN 398, Flight Sergeant Elias Rowe adjusted his oxygen mask with fingers numb from cold. His eyes fixed not on the formation ahead, but on a single aircraft drifting slightly out of sync, just enough to catch the sun at odd angles, its silhouette jagged where it should have been smooth. That Spitfire belonged to Ken Mallory, his wingman, since the days of coastal patrols over the Bristol Channel. The man who shared his last cigarette in a rain-slicked hangar at RAF Deanland, and once patched his parachute after a botched landing with needle and thread borrowed from a waif orderly. Elias didn't know it yet, but in 3 minutes and 42 seconds, he would fire 127 rounds into that fuselage. He would watch it spiral, nose first, then sideways, into a field of barley just west of Sainte-Mère-Église, trailing smoke the color of burnt honey. And when the radio crackled with static and then silence, Elias would realize the voice he'd been listening for, the calm, familiar tally-ho-L, was gone. Not downed, not evading, erased. Elias was not a hero by design. He washed out of officer training twice before being assigned to 610 Squadron as a reserve pilot. His only distinction, a meticulous logbook and an uncanny sense for wind shear. He never led flights. He followed, watched, remembered. On the ground, he was the one who noticed the fuel caps on new MK9s didn't seal properly in high humidity, who reported the odd wobble in the elevator trim during steep climbs, a quirk dismissed as pilot error by the engineering officer. In the air, he saw patterns others missed, how German FW190s always broke left after a diving pass, how cumulus banks near the coast masked engine glint until it was too late. But on that June morning, what he saw, or thought he saw, was a silhouette too angular, a turn too tight for a Spitfire. He'd spotted a Bf-109 mimicking their formation, he told himself later, weaving through their ranks like a wolf in sheep's skin. His finger squeezed the firing button without command, without hesitation. Only after the guns fell silent did his eyes catch the squadron code UU painted beneath the tail. Ken's bird, Ken's hands on the stick. Ken's laugh still echoing in the debriefing tent hours before. When the crash site was found, the wreckage bore no enemy markings, only the RAF roundel, half melted, and a charred leather glove, fingers curled as if still gripping the throttle. The inquiry lasted 2 days. Officially, it was ruled friendly fire under conditions of extreme visual confusion. Unofficially, the squadron's CO pulled Elias aside in the shadow of a Nissan hut and said, "You saw what you had to see, son. We all do." But Elias didn't believe it. He replayed the engagement in his mind like a film reel run backward. The sun's glare, the angle of the turn, the absence of tracer fire from the intruder. Something was wrong. Not just morally, but mechanically. He spent nights in the operations room, poring over reconnaissance photos, comparing silhouettes, cross-referencing weather logs. That morning, the cloud base had been at 8,500 feet, sun elevation 62 degrees. At that angle, the shadow cast by a Spitfire's elliptical wing should have been sharp, consistent. But Ken's aircraft, according to a single frame captured by a photo recon Mosquito, had cast a double shadow, faint but distinct. Elias showed it to the intelligence officer, who scoffed. "You're seeing ghosts, Rowe? Grief plays tricks." He tried the engineering section. Could vibration or stress cause a wing to warp mid-flight? The response was a raised eyebrow and a muttered, Next you'll say the sky's made of glass. Still, Elias couldn't unsee it. The anomaly hidden in plain sight. The flaw not in his judgment, but in the machine itself. Part 4, 3 weeks later, under cover of a thunderstorm that grounded all flights, Elias borrowed a grounded Mackay, knee from the maintenance hangar at RAF Ford. With the help of a disgruntled fitter named Calloway, who lost 2 brothers to unexplained stalls, he rigged a makeshift strain gauge to the starboard wing spar using salvaged aircraft wire and a pressure sensor from a decommissioned altimeter. Then at 3:14 a.m., with no clearance and rain lashing the canopy, he taxied onto the runway and took off alone. Climbing to 12,000 feet, he executed the same steep turn Ken had attempted that day over Normandy. At 42 degrees of bank, the gauge needle spiked. At 48, the entire airframe shuddered, a resonance not in the engine, but in the wing itself, a harmonic tremor that distorted the leading edge just enough to alter its profile. Back on the ground, soaked and shaking, he showed Calloway the data. A 2.3% deformation under sustained G-load, enough to mimic the silhouette of a 109 in certain lighting. They reported it. The Air Ministry sent a telegram dismissing it as non-replicable under controlled conditions. But Elias didn't need permission anymore. He'd proven it to himself. And in doing so, he'd also proven that Ken hadn't been careless at all. He'd been betrayed by the very wings that were supposed to carry him home. The modification order came quietly in September 1944. Reinforced wing spars for all Meccaniers operating east of the Seine, retrofitted under the guise of routine structural fatigue mitigation. No mention of Elias Rowe, no citation. By then, he'd already handed in his flight badge. He worked the rest of the war in a signals depot near Reading, decoding Luftwaffe weather reports, his hands never again touching a control stick. When the war ended, he vanished into the civil service, married a schoolteacher in Hampshire, and never spoke of June 17th, not even when the RAF declassified the Wingflex issue in 1951, crediting it to anonymous field observation. Decades later, an archivist found his name in a faded operations log. Rowe, Edouard requested permanent ground assignment. Reason, I hear engines in my sleep. He died in 1989, his Spitfire logbook buried with him open to the last page where he'd written in pencil so faint it almost vanished. The sky doesn't lie, but it doesn't forgive either. By war's end, the reinforced wing design had been implemented on 842 aircraft. Post-war analysis credited it with reducing in-flight structural failures by 97% during high-stress maneuvers. And somewhere over Normandy, in a field of barley long since harvested, the earth still holds the echo of a pilot who saw the truth too late and chose never to look up again.